Neighbouring South Africa has been quite supportive of Zimbabwe through the political crisis. Channel Television's South Africa Bureau Chief Betsy Dibia spoke to the head of governance and APRM program at the South Africa Institute for International Affairs, Dr. Stephen Grost, on what the future holds for South Africa's neighbour.
It's certainly been an up and down couple of weeks, starting with the firing of the Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa, and then the army taking over and it looking like a coup, sounding like a coup, but certainly not being called a coup. And then we had SADC trying to get involved, a couple of meetings held of the Organ on Politics, Defence and Security. President Zuma sent envoys to Zimbabwe. Then a very dramatic meeting of ZANU-PF where they expelled the president as the first secretary and as the president of the party. Then him making this announcement on television that he was, everybody expected him to resign in that speech, but he didn't, with all the generals flanking him. So then I think people's hopes were really dashed on Sunday night. Then the party threatened to bring impeachment proceedings, which they did. And during that process, the Speaker of Parliament read out that President Mugabe has resigned, and there was great jubilation in the streets of Harare and Bulawayo, and I even saw on our TV, certainly in Johannesburg, and I would imagine in Lagos and Nairobi and everywhere else where there's a significant Zimbabwean immigrant population. So, but I think we're heading into some uncertain times.
Going from that, as somebody said, Mugabe is an ideology, is a political structure, and that structure is still in place. All those generals, including the man who is taking over from him.
So indeed, I think ZANU-PF has been such a force within the Zimbabwe polity. It's been the ruling party for 37 years. Before that, it was a liberation movement for many, many years, fighting against the white minority government. And so those interests have become deeply entrenched. Many analysts have talked about the militarization of the Zimbabwean society. So in fact, the heads of electoral commissions and parastatal boards and so on and so forth are all with a military background. It's been characterized as a deep state. So one man's departure, and that man was 93 years old and has certainly been at the center of everything, is not going to solve all of Zimbabwe's profound problems. And economically, as we know, the economy is in a very bad way. Politically, I think it's very fraught. This seems to have been very much an internal party battle that then went onto the national stage, and we're not sure how this is going to play out.
ZANU-PF was center stage, and some of these opposition members seem a little bit lost. They're happy, but like, what role am I going to play? What should they be doing at this time?
So I think everybody is kind of pinching themselves, because 2 weeks ago nobody would have predicted that Robert Mugabe is no longer the president of the Republic of Zimbabwe. So I think they were perhaps caught on the back foot. Obviously the energy, the impetus came from the army and from ZANU-PF. The opposition is actually fractured and splintered and not united around one candidate. Morgan Tsvangirai, who's been for a long time the head of the MDC, is ill. He's been having cancer treatments here in South Africa and in the UK. They haven't been able to yet forge a united position, and I think they were, as always, I think ZANU-PF holds the cards. So it was interesting when the impeachment procedures were going to proceed. There was a ZANU-PF spokesman who said, yes, we think we'll have the 73 opposition MPs in our pocket, and we only have to then find 120 something from within the party. It didn't get to that point where there was an actual vote, but so would they have then helped ZANU-PF deal with its internal problem, or was it in the nature of what's best for Zimbabwe?
The imperatives for the country now, what are the major things? Either to reshape the structure that we're talking about, or make it good or better for the country?
So I think it's difficult. I'm not sure everybody has thought this through. I mean, there were probably plans that President Mugabe was not going to live forever, but so certainly some thinking has been done. But absolutely, I mean, I think the number one priority is, what is the role of the military? Does it pull back? Does it allow the politicians and the civilians to rule, or does it still maintain control? I think a key factor in the next few weeks is going to be the ZANU-PF Congress and what happens there. But then the priority's got to be the economy, finding some way to eat into the huge unemployment in Zimbabwe, to restore confidence both internally and with investors. The relationship with China will be important because China is one of Zimbabwe's major partners. And then what happens with elections? Do we go to elections at the middle of the year? Is there a national unity government? Is it only a ZANU-PF, and is it going to be a Lacoste faction under Mnangagwa? Is he going to reach across to some of his former opponents? That's uncertain.
We're not seeing a lot of praise for SADC. Do you think the way they handled it was good enough? Do you think SADC was being too cautious or given the right sort of caution in this case?
So I think SADC acted quite quickly. President Zuma sent 2 envoys a day or 2 afterwards. So they went into to find out the facts. Then the Troika of the Organ on Politics, Defence and Security met in Botswana, but that outcome was to say, let's have another meeting. Let's meet at heads of state level. And President Zuma was meant to go to Zimbabwe, but that was cancelled. So I think it's different from the way ECOWAS acts in West Africa. I mean, we saw a very strong response on the Gambia, but let's face it, the Gambia is not Zimbabwe. The dynamics are different, the politics are different, the situation is different. What certainly seems very clear was that many Zimbabwean stakeholders said, SADC, we don't need you, stay out, we're going to handle it this way. I mean, we saw public demonstrations in support of the military's action and placards and signs saying, SADC, stay out. So I think there were probably fears from the public, from some members of the public, that SADC would try and keep President Mugabe in power, and there were feelings that he was playing that SADC card, that his fellow heads of state would keep him in power or restore him to power. That doesn't seem to be likely now.
Let's look at South Africa. You have millions of Zimbabweans here. They believe South Africa has pampered the president or the former president a lot. What should South Africa be doing now, probably to support the stability?
So I think the fortunes of South Africa and Zimbabwe are very closely intertwined. As you said, there are millions of Zimbabweans in South Africa. Many are professionals, doctors, lawyers. I think in the sector that I work in, the NGO sector, almost every second head of an organization working in the NGO space or the think tank space is Zimbabwean. We have a lot of professionals here, as you say, some working in their profession, some doing very menial jobs. Many of them are going to want to go home. How does that get managed? South Africa has also had a big headache in dealing with Zimbabwean migrants. I think it's in South Africa's interest that the economy is on a strong footing in Zimbabwe. Not everybody who has come to settle in South Africa is going to go back, but I think there are going to be many people who are going to want to go back. The timing of that's going to have to be managed. But yes, this remains a very important neighbor and one of our most important trading partners. So absolutely, South Africa will have to put in strong diplomatic and economic efforts to understand, manage, and influence the transition.
You're watching Diplomatic Channel. Still ahead, we go to another part of the world where food, medicine, and supplies are being stalled over a diplomatic dispute. The UN says more humanitarian aid is urgently needed in Yemen. Do stay with us.